Happy cow stares at freedom beyond the fence. Ooh, that looked painful.
So, before we get into the trigger colliders, I'd like to quickly talk about how our sounds are actually organised and played in this project. So what we have here is a script called sound. And this is just a class that we've set up that has a whole bunch of public variables. We can set a name, the audio clip, volume and pitch, and specific volume and pitch variances. These are just basic parameters. And then we also set whether it loops. And then we have here an object on our hierarchy called Audio Manager, which has an Audio Manager script attached. And this Audio Manager, you can see here, it declares public arrays of that class sound that we've made and calls them various groups of sound effects that we want. So what that looks like in the inspector is it looks like these. We have the same names of all those arrays in our Audio Manager, and then if we go into one, we declare how many sounds should be in this array, and then each one of these has the same parameters that our class sound has. So we can set a name, assign an audio clip, set volume and pitch and the variances, and whether or not it loops. So then, in Audio Manager, on awake, what happens is it calls this audio source generation sounds function, and it passes along each array that we've set up. And then in this function, for each sound that's in the array that we've passed, we want to set the source to add a component for the audio source. We want to set what clip it is to the one that we assigned an inspector, and also set which loop parameter it is. We've got two of these functions. The only difference is in the name. The first one is audio source generation sounds, and the second one's narration, which we can see here only has the array of the narration sounds passed to it. The only difference that this has is which mixer group it's set to in order to duck certain audio whenever the narration is playing. So all of the narration sounds are passed to this mixer group narration, whereas all of the others are passed to the mixer group other. So then, when we're looking to actually play a sound, wherever it happens, it could be in our player script, such as here we've got Audio Manager.instance play. At the very start, we've got play our ambience. What it does is equal sound s as find sound of the name that's passed to it. And then this is another function, find sound, where it cycles through each array that we have of our sounds, looking to match the name. Essentially, if it doesn't find it in the first array, then it goes on to the next one, so on and so on, until it finds it, or if it doesn't find it, it'll just output an error. And then once it's found it, it goes back to our play, and we just check if we actually have it or not. And then we set the volume and pitch to be the specified volume and pitch in our inspector. That's also varied by our variances that we've set up as well. And then we just play that source. And stopping it is as simple as just find the sound again of the name that's been passed to it, and then stop that source. So now that that's all covered, we can talk about our trigger collisions. So the game that we actually have is all very linear. It's a side scroller where you're just starting in one end, and you're making your way all the way over to the other. So the way that we're conveying the story in the game is that we've got a narrator that essentially talks about some of the effects of the issue of factory farming as it goes, and then just conveys other messages. And so we need to set up specific locations that we want the narrator to say certain things at. So what we have here in the hierarchy is we've got a little section for triggers and audio triggers. And if we click on that, we can see all of these ones that we've got set up. So that's all of these faint green boxes that are here. So how these work is each one has a box collider 2D attached, and then in our player script we have a function to check if the player has collided with a collider. And then we check if the collider name is equaling fence01 trigger for this first one. Well, we know that that wants to play narration 3, so we can just add a wee check to see if it's already played it before, because you don't want it to keep playing if the player was to go in and out of that trigger. So if it hasn't played it before, set it so that it has, and then play the specific narration we want, which then gets passed to Audio Manager and just plays the sound, finds it, and plays it how we've set it up in the inspector.
Finally, Happy has defeated the fence with flatulence.
So we have trigger colliders set up for the narration, which is these top 8 ones, but we've also got some set up to change the ambience. So when the game starts, we have a farm ambience that starts at the farmyard, and then as the player progresses into the forest, it changes to a forest ambience. And then when the player enters the factory farm, it changes to a kind of mega farm ambience. And then that goes away whenever the end sequence starts. So for the narration triggers, we didn't need to worry about whether the player would enter a trigger whilst the previous narration was still running, because we set them far apart that we timed that we just didn't really have to worry about that. However, the ambience is playing constantly, so whenever the player triggers the ambience change, the other one will need to be stopped and a new one will need to play. Now, to make sure that this was a seamless transition, what we have here are different functions for the different audio transitions. So this first transition, where it goes from a farm ambience to a forest ambience, triggers this function, AudioTrans1. We find the sound for farm ambience that's currently playing, and then we start a coroutine to fade it out over a parameter of 1. We then find the sound for the forest ambience, and then fade that in also over a parameter of 1. So the fade out and fade in are these classes here. How it works is we pass fade out an audio source and a fade time, which is that float parameter earlier. We then set a start volume float to equal the volume of our audio source. And then, while the audio source volume is greater than 0, we take that volume and then equal it to itself minus what the start volume was times time.delta time over the fade time. And what this will do is it'll keep cycling through this while statement, and it'll keep minusing a certain portion of volume from itself, essentially acting as just a fade out. And then this only stops whenever the volume is not greater than 0, so the volume will be 0. At that point, we stop the source, and then we equal the source volume to its start volume just to reset the volume. Fade in works very similarly, just opposite. So we pass an audio source in the fade time. We then set a start volume to equal 0.2, and our audio source volume is equal to 0, so that starts muted. We then play that. Then, while the volume of the audio source is less than 1, so it's less than max volume, we then set the audio source volume to equal itself plus the start volume times delta time over fade time. This does the exact same as fade out, just the opposite, so it gradually fades it in. And then that'll stop whenever the audio source volume is equal to 1, because it won't be less than 1 anymore. At that point, we just make sure that we are equaling it to 1, just in case it wasn't exactly 1.